hello. I didn't see you there.
So you'd like to learn about child-directed speech?
Oh, is that why you're here?
Join us as we take you on a journey
Deep into the world
of child-directed speech.
Let's start with what we know about child-directed speech, according to the textbook by Jean Stillwell Petchy. CDS, also known as baby talk, motherese, or infant-directed speech, is a special register used when talking to young children that is implemented by parents, caregivers, and even older children. But how does CDS differ from adult-to-adult speech?
CDS has a mean length utterance of 4.24 as opposed to the adult average of 11.94. It is articulated more clearly, is more repetitive, has fewer embeddings, a higher pitch, a more exaggerated intonation, and is more redundant given situational context.
Now that we've laid down the groundwork, let's explore some of the research surrounding child-directed speech. Many believe that the primary function of child-directed speech is to maintain conversation and get the child's attention, and that the prosodic features themselves may or may not influence learning. Getting the child's attention is only one of many purposes that the exaggerated intonation of CDS plays. Infants and elementary school children alike prefer speech with changes in intonation, and before an infant utters their first word, they are able to babble in sentence-like contours. Research done by Amy Warren Lubecker and John Neil Bohannon III recorded 16 mothers and 16 fathers in conversation with their children, including 8 5-year-olds and 8 2-year-olds with equal gender distribution. The results of this study found mothers raised their pitch equally for both the 5-year-olds and the 2-year-olds. However, their frequency fluctuated more for the younger group. When speaking to adults, the women varied more in pitch than their male counterparts. Fathers exhibited even greater increase in pitch and range than the mothers when addressing the 2-year-olds, but used the same intonation for the older children as they did with adults. The researchers found a lack of any direct evidence of children paying greater attention to the exaggerated intonation. So, if gaining a child's attention is the only goal when using these prosodic features, then logically, all of the speakers should have addressed listeners of the same age in the same way. If that's the case, then why did the fathers vary their frequency more with the younger children and significantly less with the older group? On average, the mothers spent 50 hours per week in contact with the children, whereas the men were spending a mere 20 hours per week. It's possible the limited contact with the children encouraged the men to make the time as meaningful as possible by exerting more effort in maintaining the child's attention. If this is true, then we are left to wonder, why does the father speak to 5-year-old children without these prosodic features? The varying frequency characteristic of female language is perceived as emotional, and as such, cultural sex role expectations dictate the men should return to their more monotone speech patterns to avoid being perceived as feminine. Ultimately, further research is necessary. What we can conclude is that the different patterns between male and female caregiver speech indicate the prosodic features of CDS serve a far greater purpose than attention maintenance alone.
Next, let's look at the influence of culture on child-directed speech. How do caregivers in different cultures speak to children? Are there aspects of child-directed speech that are similar across all cultures? Or do they vary individually? In a study comparing Japanese and American mothers, researchers found that the mothers in both groups used CDS characteristics such as simplification of language and frequent repetition, when speaking to their children. Also, when speaking to infants in different age groups, the American and Japanese mothers made similar changes in their speech. However, the study noted some differences as well. American mothers had a higher tendency to label objects than their Japanese counterparts. Conversely, Japanese mothers were more likely to engage social routines through the use of objects. The same study also found that American infants had a noun vocabulary which was larger than that of Japanese infants. Another study examined French-speaking mothers and Wolof-speaking Senegalese mothers, both living in Paris. While both groups engaged in a special register when speaking to infants, there were a number of differences. Wolof mothers tend to engage in triadic speech, incorporating other members of society into conversation with the infants and themselves. Wolof mothers used more imperatives than French mothers. French mothers try to encourage vocal productions within the infant's first month and emphasize less physical engagement, whereas Wolof-speaking mothers tend to engage children in physical, rhythmic play and used more directives and affectionate terms. French-speaking and Wolof-speaking mothers have differing cultural views about the social status of an infant. French mothers tend to have an egalitarian view and treat young infants as equal language partners. This was reflected in conversations with the infant, where French mothers were more likely to alter or soften utterances. Another study of Romani-speaking gypsies in Hungary investigated how a culture with a rich and largely oral tradition of communication would approach child-directed speech. The study found that the Roma people utilized many of the characteristics of CDS when speaking to children. The study also noted that communication to children by the Roma reflected the importance that is placed on oral storytelling tradition. While the modeling of dialogue to children is a well-documented feature of CDS, Roma people also incorporated dramatic folklore and storytelling aspects in their model dialogues, often making up a story involving the future of the child. As evident by these studies, the characteristics of CDS are present in child-caregiver speech across many different cultures. Cultural values and views on a child's status within the culture also affect which characteristics of CDS are employed by a caregiver.
Family dynamics have a surprisingly pervasive sway over the impact of child-directed speech. Much of the literature on the topic of CDS focuses on how parents and caregivers influence language acquisition. This interaction is extremely significant, yet the fact that older children use CDS on younger children suggests that the presence of siblings might just have as big of an impact. Two researchers, Malmir and Asadi, used video recordings of 20 children interacting with their families to assess how speech directed from an older brother or sister to a younger sibling affects the child's development. Their testing revealed that toddlers who do not have a sibling demonstrated superior production over the toddlers who have a preschool-age sibling. The toddlers with an older sibling, however, had better comprehension. This improved comprehension could be a result of the more varied and complex linguistic environment younger siblings are exposed to by the speech addressed to them by their older brother or sister. The younger sibling is not the only party influenced by this relationship. The dynamic of siblings affects the behavioral qualities and sociological perceptions that make up how we utilize child-directed speech as adults. A study done at Kyoto University found that the women who had siblings growing up were more likely to use motherese in their own speech. People with siblings have been found to have higher levels of cooperation and persistence, which are also the characteristics adults need in order to interact well with children. People with these qualities are at least more likely to maintain the child's attention by trying to modify their prosodic features. Alejandra Cristia suggested that infant-directed speech contains not just linguistic, but also emotionally rich input. This idea is explored in a study done by Kaplan, Bachorowski, and Zarlengo-Strauss on mothers with symptoms of depression. In their own words, the CD speech produced by mothers with comparatively more symptoms of depression may fail to promote associative learning because it lacks the acoustic qualities adequately to sensitize infants. They also note that these women exhibit less modulated speech, which they claim is necessary for infants to reach a heightened state of attention and learn efficiently. This particular study supports the concept that the features of CDS aid in language acquisition, but the implications of their findings suggest that speaking and listening to motherese has an emotional impact and effect. The research go on to express that the symptoms expressed by their mothers may lead to the children developing deficits in performance later on, but the features of depressed caregivers make it difficult to isolate the variables. As you can see, caregivers and siblings each play an important role in developing an infant's speech. The different linguistic features that children are exposed to by their family provide a varied source of input that seems to have a significant influence on how the learner perceives and produces language.
The information reviewed in this video has been primarily focused on the sociocultural factors that influence and are influenced by child-directed speech, though this is only a small representation of the general research available. Much of the literature addresses not just the effect of gender, familial, and cultural roles on CDS, but on its efficacy as a whole. One of the words that comes up again and again is interactionist, a model encompassed by Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. This model places importance on the role of interaction between children and experienced adults, and seems to meet relatively widespread acceptance when discussing motherese. Meredith Rowe, for instance, studied the role of quantity and quality of CDS in vocabulary development, and cited positive results when parents speak at a level that challenges children, and yet also supports them and facilitates learning opportunities. Cynthia Fisher comments on the prosodic features in particular, arguing that acoustic changes act as cues to learners for identifying utterance boundaries, and that knowledge of acoustic structures helps children to piece together language. Despite the wealth of research available, there is still much to be discovered in the exciting, stimulating, and dynamic world of child-directed speech.
Till next time. See what's on.
Go sit.
There we go.
You wave bye-bye?
Bye now. Lovely people. She's like, enough of this. I will not play in your games.